Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar. My name is Nina Colley, a manager for Cyber Risk with Risk Advisory Unit, Deloitte, Ghana. This morning, we are here on this digital platform to discuss the new changes in the PCI DSS version 4.0. As you may know, PCI DSS stands for Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard and is a set of security standards designed to protect the cardholder data and ensure the secure handling of payment transactions. We believe that by end of this webinar, you have a comprehensive understanding of the new changes in the PCI DSS version 4.0 and the knowledge you need to navigate the evolving landscape of this payment card security, as well as the steps necessary to ensure compliance in your organization. Just a few housekeeping rules before we get started. Please note that this webinar will be recorded and uploaded on the Deloitte Ghana YouTube page. For the avoidance of distraction, we have muted the microphone of all participants, and you can raise your hand during the question and answer time, and you unmuted your microphone to allow you to ask your question. You can also send your question or put your question in the chat box. And if you think of a question of the speaker at any time, just put it on the chat box as I mentioned, and I will either pose it to our speakers at that time or hold it for the discussion session till the end of the webinar. A link to a survey will be put in the chat box for you to provide us with your feedback getting towards the end of the webinar. We would like to improve our event with your feedback. Please feel free to drop the feedback before you drop off. So at this time, I would like to invite the partner of Risk Advisory, who is also the host of this webinar, to give us our opening remark.
Kofi Ewa is currently the Risk Advisory Partner and Technology, Media and Telecom Industry Leader at Deloitte, Ghana, with over 13 years' experience in risk management. He has worked and delivered transformational projects to global and regional clients in financial services, telecom, oil and gas, manufacturing, and public sector. Kofi has both industry and practice experience working as an ex-banker in one of the leading banks in Nigeria and as risk management specialist for two of the global Big Four professional services firms in Nigeria and Ghana. His wealth of practical experience has distinguished him as the go-to person by top industry practitioners on risk management matters.
Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. And on behalf of the leadership of Deloitte, I would like to welcome you all to this highly anticipated webinar, the changes in PCI DSS version 4, the way forward. It is truly an honor to have each and every one of you, our distinguished guests and industry experts, as you join us to delve into the topic that is shaping the future of payment industry in Ghana and also in the world at large. I'm excited by the number of participants that we have, but I would like to use this opportunity to express my profound gratitude to our partners, ISACA Accra chapter, our other partners, which is the ISCQ, that is the International Information System Security Certification Consortium. We also have our partners, the Institute of ICT Professionals in Ghana and the Women in Cybersecurity. These institutions or expert professional body have been very instrumental in shaping the digital landscape or the digital ecosystem in Ghana. Ladies and gentlemen, permit me to take you through a quick journey into the topic of today, the PCI DSS version 4. As we all know, in March 2022, the PCI board released a new version of PCI standard, and which is what we call the PCI version 4.0. And the 4.0 is anticipated to replace the 3.21, which is currently in practice. It is expected that within the next 2 years, and that is from March 2022 to first quarter in 2024, that the PCI version 3.2 will be retired. And so we are in a transition phase. What it means is that industry players and practitioners are expected to prepare themselves towards adopting the version 4.0. I would not want to take too much of your time talking through this because we have experts on the call who will be doing justice to the topic. One of the major things that I would expect of everyone on the call is for us to approach the webinar with an open mind and to share with an open mind and share vision, and to also engage the team. In fact, I would want to see us engage the team members in discussing and shaping the ideas of how to implement the PCI version 4.0. I also want to hear and see a lot of questions and perspective from industry players in terms of how to navigate through this journey. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, thank you so much. And I will hand you over to the team as experts to take us through this journey.
Sheriff Issa is an information security governance, risk and compliance professional with 15 years of work experience and currently a risk advisory manager at Deloitte, Ghana. His experience spans IT management, IT project management, training, business continuity, and information security. He has consulted for several banks and fintechs across Africa on the implementation, maintenance, and auditing of international standards. He has also supported banks in Ghana to comply with the Bank of Ghana Cyber Information Security Directive.
Mary is a senior consultant with the Risk Advisory Division of Deloitte, Ghana. She has been working actively as a cyber GRC consultant with vast experience in assisting organizations attain and maintain compliance with security best practices and standards. Over the past few years, she has played active roles on implementation of information security, business continuity and quality management standard, PCI DSS, IT control transformation and assurance, auditing against international standards. Mary has worked with clients in financial, manufacturing, government and telecommunication industries and other service industries.
Thank you once again for joining this webinar. We are now going to take the pause to understand how familiar you are with PCI DSS. Okay, please answer the poll on your screen. Just click on it and the result will show. It's now coming. Okay. Keep it coming, keep it coming. Thank you very much for responding to this poll. Out of 72% of people that responded, we have question 1, how familiar are you with the with the payment card industry data security standard? We have 16% answering as high. We have 45% medium, 39% as low. We'll move over to the next question. Prior to the publicity of this webinar, do you know of the latest version of PCI DSS? 100% answered, and we have 9% saying yes, 91% saying no. What is your level of knowledge on the changes in PCI DSS version 4.0? We have 2% saying high, we have 29% saying medium, and 69% low. Thank you very much for responding to this poll. This webinar is an eye-opener for all of us, and it's going to help us understand more on the changes. Thank you. So we'll dive straight into the webinar proper. Changes in PCI DSS version 4.0 and the way forward. So we are going to be discussing this in the webinar: introduction, implementation timelines, key changes, with new requirements, transition from 3.2.1 to 4.0. Thereafter, we'll take the question and answer. What is PCI DSS? So let me use the layman term. Normally, people don't know what payment card is. It's just like it's our ATM cards that we use. So if they ask you what is payment card, just simply say it's your ATM card. So it's actually, PCI DSS is a payment card industry data security standard that is intended for all entities that store or process or transmit cardholder data. This includes all entities involved in payment card accounts, processing, including merchants, processors, acquirers, issuers, and other service providers. Over the years, PCI DSS version and standards have transitioned. So I'm going to take you through the history of PCI DSS from version 1 up to the latest version. So in October 2008, we had the first version released as version 1.2. Thereafter, just within a year, we had the second version, which is version 1.2.1, which was released in 2009. We had the third one, which was released in October 2010, version 2. And the fourth one was also released in November 2013 as version 3. We also have the fifth one released in April 2015 as version 3.1. Thereafter, we had a sixth version, which was released as version 3.2 in April 2016. Then immediately after that, we had another version, which was the current version we were in, released as the seventh version in May 2018. Now there is a new version that is being released in March 2022, which is the version 4.0 that we are going to be discussing about. Transition timelines. So we have a certain period for implementation timelines. From the first release date, which was in March 2022, that was when version 4.0 was released, up to 31st March 2024, that is the retirement period. We have 2 years period of transition from the release date up to 1st April 2025, that is for the future dated requirement. It's going to take us 2 years from when the version 4.0 was released for us to transition into the version 4.0. Key changes in this standard. There are 3 types of changes that have occurred so far in version 4.0. We have evolving requirements, clarification or guidance, structure or formatting. So for evolving requirements, it's just to ensure that the standard is up to date with emerging threats and technologies, and also changes in the payment industry. For example, new modified requirements or testing procedures, or the removal of a new requirement. For clarification or guidance, it just simply means that the wordings and explanations were changed, were updated, and definitions and additions of instructions also to increase the understanding of providers for future information and guidance on particular topics. For structural or format, this is just, as the name implies, it's just the structure that was changed and maybe formatting of the content that was changed in the standard. Change types. So from the previous slide, I said that there are 3 changes that have occurred. So 78 of them were evolving requirements. 104 of them were clarification or guidance. 53 of them were structural or format changes. New appendices were also added to the standard just to give more understanding and clarification on what to do. So we have the Appendix D, which is the customized approach. We have Appendix E, sample templates to support customized approach. We have Appendix F, leveraging on PCI DSS. This is for software security to support requirement 6 that has to do with processing and mechanism for developing and maintaining secure system and software. Then we have Appendix G, which is just the terms, abbreviation, and acronyms, just understanding of how the standard works. New requirements that were added. We have a total of 64 new requirements that were added. We have 11 of them applicable to all service providers only. We have 53 of them applicable to all entities, whether you're an acquirer, issuer, provider, or a service provider. Then we have 13 of them, which are the future dated, which are the immediate requirements that we have to implement by 1st April 2024. Then we have 51 of them effective on 1st April 2025 as the future dated requirements. At this point, I'll invite my colleague to take over to take you through the new requirements that were implemented. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mary, for the presentation. So I will take over from the new requirements. So I'm going to dive deeper into the 64 new requirements that that Mary has mentioned, and we're going to look at the distribution of these new requirements. So these new requirements are scattered around the various requirements of the standard. But from 3.2.1, we knew of we call them requirements. Now, 4.0 is calling it principal requirement. So in terms of new requirements, there was no new requirement in principal requirement 1, but from principal requirement 2 to principal requirement 12, there were new requirements in there, including the Annexure A. So for PR2, there was 1 new requirement. For PR3, there were 8 new requirements. PR4, there were 3. PR5, there were 5 new requirements. PR6, there were 4. PR7, there were 4. PR8, there were 8 new requirements. PR9, there were 2. PR10, there were 5. PR11, there were 6 changes. And PR12, there were 14 changes. So in the Annexure, primarily in the Annexure A, there were 4 changes, 4 new requirements in there. So we're going to go deep into all these 64 new requirements as captured in version 4.0. So in principal requirement 2, there was 1 new requirement. And in fact, this new requirement cuts across almost all the principal requirements from requirement PR1 to PR12. So basically 2.1.2 of PR2 says that roles and responsibilities that are related to activities to be undertaken with that particular requirement are supposed to be documented, assigned, and understood. Now, this is, as I indicated, that this is going to be repeated in the subsequent sections. So what this basically is saying that all the activities that are supposed to be undertaken as part of meeting the requirements of PCI DSS, there's the need to get that documented, assigned, and understood. And I must explain that you can see a legend here. So this legend is explaining what we have in the bracket of each of the new requirements. So as earlier indicated by Mary, A indicates that this requirement is applicable to all entities, whether you are issuer, acquirer, merchant, etc. Then the F says, means that it's a future data requirement, which means it takes effect in April 1, 2025. Then I means it's immediate requirement, which means it takes effect April 1, 2024. Then S stands for service providers only. So as we go on, we can just look at it for alignment's sake. So move on to the new requirement in version principal requirement 3. So in section 3.1.2 of PR3, it also talks about having roles and responsibilities documented, assigned, and understood. Then 3.2.1 also says that sensitive authentication data that are stored prior to completion of authorization need to be kept, at the minimum by way of implementing policies, procedures, and processes for data retention and disposal. Basically, there should be PPPs in place, policy processes in place to ensure that sensitive authenticating data are disposed at the appropriate time and using the appropriate mechanism. Then section 3.3.2 also talks about ensuring that the sensitive authentication data that are stored prior to completion of authorization are encrypted using strong cryptography. So in fact, PCI DSS only permits issuers to store sensitive authentication data. And for issuers that store SAD, they are supposed to ensure that those authentication, SAD, sensitive authentication data are managed with strong encryption. So when it comes to section 3.3.3, it also says that SAD that are stored by issuers should be encrypted using strong cryptography. Then 3.4.2 also says that technical control should be used to prevent the copying or relocation of primary account numbers when we are using remote access technology. So basically, what 3.4.2 is saying that when you are using a remote access technology on within the CD, within the hardware data environment, it should strictly prohibit the copying or relocation of primary accounts unless there's a documented business justification for that. And in terms of implementing this, it's as easy as going through the instructions or based on the instruction given by the remote access technology that you're using, and that will help you to implement that. Then for 3.5.1.1, it also says that hashes that are used to render PAN unreadable should be keyed. They should be keyed cryptographic hashes of the entire PAN with associated key management processes and procedures. Then 3.5.1.2 also says that there's a need to implement a risk level partition or level encryption when rendering PAN unreadable and removable electronic media. So basically, when we're using removable media, electronic media, whether it's external hard drive, whether it is memory card, just mentioned them. When there's PAN, certain primary account number, certain data, certain on such electronic media, there should be some level of this level or partition level encryption. Of course, it applies to other removable devices that are domiciled in IT systems. So we look at section 3.6.1.1. It says a documented description of the cryptographic architecture should include prevention of the use of same cryptographic keys for both production and test environment. So basically what this is saying is that for within the organization policy space or architecting space, there should be a documentation that strictly prohibits the use of cryptographic keys in both production and in the test environment. So move on to requirement 4. So under requirement 4, there were 3 new requirements. So section 4.1.2 also talks about the responsibilities which we've spoken about. Then 4.2.1 states that certificates that are used to safeguard PAN during transmission over public networks should be confirmed as valid and not expired or revoked. So if you're using certificate to protect transmission of PAN or card data in general, you need to ensure that those certificates are valid and they are not revoked. And further, the standard gives guidelines as to even some of the sources you can use to get this validation done. Then in section 4.2.1.1, it says we should have inventory of all trusted keys and certificates. So you should have them captured and with appropriate properties or attributes you want to capture about them. So for section PR5, Principal Requirement 5, on the changes, section 5.1.2 talks about the roles and responsibilities as already emphasized on. Then 5.2.3.1 says there should be a targeted risk analysis to determine frequency of periodic evaluation of system components identified as not at risk for malware. So basically what this is saying is that there are some systems that are assumed or attacked to be not to be too much prone to malware, like the Unix OS, the Linux, and the Mac OS. But what this requirement is saying that there should be a risk analysis to determine how frequently we validate to check if indeed these systems are not prone to malware attacks. At first, we all thought Linux is malware proof, but lessons all over the place is showing out that they are not that proof. So you should do that kind of risk analysis to make that determination. Of course, looking at your environment. Then section 5.3.2.1 says there should be a targeted risk analysis to determine frequency of periodic malware scans. So scanning for malware within your environment should be based on the risk that you are exposed to. Either you want to do that daily, hourly, every 30 minutes, every 6 hours. It should be based on the risk that you find yourself in. And I must mention that all the conversation we're having here, yes, it can be applied in the general security sense, but we are looking at the CDE, what we call the card data environment, any system that interacts, process, or transmit card order data. Then move to section 5.3.3. It says that anti-malware scans are to be performed when removable electronic media is in use. So if you're using any removable electronic media, external hard drive, pen drive, memory drive, or memory stick, just mention them, there should be a need to scan such devices. Then 5.4.1 says that there should be automated mechanisms to detect and protect personnel against phishing attacks. Phishing is the number one tool used by the bad guys. And as Mary earlier indicated, this is a hardcore evolving requirement. And there's a need to have automated solution in place. And with this, we're looking at whether anti-spoofing tools, anti-phishing tools, etc., that can help in that regard. So we want to requirement 6. So under PR6, there are 4 new requirements in there. 6.1.2 is talking about the roles and responsibilities. Then 6.3.2 says there should be an inventory for bespoke and custom software. And this is to help identify vulnerabilities or patch management. In fact, if you look at 6.3.2 in detail, it's more focused on integrations, API integrations, and the likes, so that you're able to identify key vulnerabilities that you are exposed to, especially from the third-party perspective. Then 6.4.2 also says that there's a need to deploy automated technical solution that continually detect and prevent web-based attacks on public web-facing applications. So in simple terms, we need to have a web application firewall. So there's a need to have a WAF in place to protect our public-facing applications, web applications. Then 6.4.3 says the authority and integrity of all payment page scripts loaded in and executed in customer browsers need to be managed. So basically what this is saying is that for the scripts that are executed within the customer browser, there's a need to validate whether it is authorized and also check the integrity before customers transact business over the web. The essence of this is that bad guys can take advantage of the script. They can manipulate the script, and it will have direct consequence on both the customer and the reputation of the PCI entity. So we want to requirement 7. So under PR7, there are 4 new requirements. 7.1.2 is talking about roles and responsibilities. 7.2.4 is saying that all user accounts and related asset privileges should be reviewed appropriately. Appropriately here means that it should be reviewed at least every 6 months. It should be reviewed when there are changes within the environment. So user access review needs to be done at least every 6 months. 7.2.5 says, assign and manage all application and system accounts and related access privileges appropriately. So for application and system accounts, these such accounts, they are not user accounts per se, but systems used for specific purposes. And there's a need to manage this account, because if bad guys get hold of this account, in fact, they usually have a lot of privileges. So there's a need to appropriately manage such accounts. Then 7.2.5.1 says that all access by application and system accounts and related access privileges should be reviewed, just like reviewing a normal user account or interactive user account as captured in 7.2.4. We need to also review such accounts and ensure systems have access to the right resources that they're supposed to have access to. Then go to principal requirement 8. In principal requirement 8, 8.1.2 also talks about the roles and responsibilities. 8.3.6 says that there's a need to meet the minimum level of complexity for passwords for authentication. So what 8.3.6 is saying is that if there's a need to use only a single factor authentication, which is username and password, in using that password, you need to make sure that it meets the complexity. So the complexity is that it should be alphanumeric, there should be numbers, there should be letters in there, and also it should meet the minimum of 12 characters. From 3.2.1, we're looking at about 8 characters. Now it's saying there should be a minimum of 12 characters that password need to meet. Of course, it also gives the room to systems that may not support that password length to have minimum of 8 characters. Then 8.3.10.1 also says that passwords and passphrase, if they are the only authentication factor for customer user access, they need to be changed at least every 90 days. So this is a requirement specifically for service providers. So if service providers are providing platforms that are meant for their customers, they need to ensure that the passwords are changed every 90 days, especially if there's no other form of authentication, if there's no multiple factor of authentication. So section 8.4.2 also say that multi-factor authentication should be implemented for all access into the CDE. So in 3.2.1, the standard was more focused on remote access into the CDE. Now it's saying that any access into the CDE, whether remote or even non-remote, whatever it is, you need to have a multi-factor authentication in place before you can access the CDE. Then 8.5.1 says there should also be a multi-factor authentication systems that should be appropriately implemented. So when we talk of appropriately implementing an MFA mechanism, it should make sure that it is implemented in a secured manner, going through all the security configuration that's supposed to be done. You need to ensure that admins cannot play with that, and also make sure that bad guys cannot intercept this code. So that's what I mean by implemented appropriately. Then 8.6.1 says that interactive login for accounts used by system or application should be managed. So we earlier spoke of system account, but system account sometimes too, there can be an interactive login for such accounts. So then there's a need to manage those accounts and ensure internal and external parties don't misuse such accounts. Then 8.6.2 also says that passwords used for interactive login for application system accounts are to be protected against misuse. And 8.6.3 also says passwords for any application system accounts are to be protected against misuse. So all of these are focused on securing system and user accounts, especially the privileged ones. So move on to requirement 9. So in principal requirement 9, there were 2 new requirements. So 9.1.2 is talking about the roles and responsibilities as earlier indicated. Then 9.5.1.2.1 is saying that there should be a targeted risk analysis performed to determine the frequency of periodic points of interaction device inspection. So when we talk about POI devices, example is the POS devices, the ATM machines that we have. So what this requirement is saying that there's a need to do, perform a risk analysis to determine how frequently you inspect the devices. And this will depend on maybe the location of that devices, the traffic of that devices, whether there's even a security there or not. So these are some of the things that come to play in determining how frequently you need to inspect such devices. So move on to requirement 10, principal requirement 10. The first new requirement is the roles and responsibilities. And under requirement 10.4.1.1, it says that audit logs should be reviewed automatically, or there should be an automated ways of reviewing audit log. In fact, when it comes to 3.2.1, it was kind of silent on how it should be reviewed in terms of the tool side. But now it's saying that there's a need to have it automated. And then automation means there should be a tool. And in terms of tools we can use, it should not necessarily be SIM. There are instances when some organizations, especially I would say the new ones of the small, younger organizations, when you mention SIM, it's going to break their account. But you can use log aggregators, you can use event log analyzers, there are so many log tools you may use, which may not necessarily be, a SIM. So you can use log harvesting and passing solutions for that. So under 10.4.2.1, it also says that there should be a targeted risk analysis to determine the frequency of log reviews for all other system components. So what this means is that if you look at 10.4.2, it specifies frequency for reviewing certain logs, certain event logs, like logs from critical systems, logs for systems within a CD, logs from systems that provide security services, logs of critical systems. So it specifies some frequencies by saying that aside these set of assets, if you are to review the events or logs of the other systems, there's a need to do a risk analysis to determine the frequency of such review. Then 10.7.2 also says that failures of critical security control system should be detected, alerted, and addressed promptly. So critical security control systems, they are the systems that are providing security to us. They can be the tools we use, the IDS, the IPS, the WAFs, the firewalls, the same solution, just mentioned them. If there are failures in these critical security systems, there should be mechanisms to detect, alert, and address them promptly. Because if they fail, they are meant to protect us. So if they fail, it means we are doomed, especially when we don't know we are putting all our hopes on them. And I bet you these devices fail. So we move on to 10.7.3, which says that failures of such critical security control systems are to be responded to promptly. So once it comes to notice that such systems have failed, there's the need to respond them on time. In fact, the standard goes further to specify specific actions you need to do. You need to identify the root cause analysis. You need to have corrective measures. You need to have preventive measures. In fact, it says you should fix it on the spot. Then you can go back and do documentation and learn from it. Then we move on to requirement 11. So under PR11, these are the new requirements in there. Requirement 11.1.2 talks about the roles and responsibilities. 11.3.1.1 says that all other applicable vulnerabilities are to be managed. So what this means is that, I mean, in normal practice, if the vulnerabilities are identified, we focus on high, medium, or critical high, and even leave out the medium. But what this requirement is saying that if the vulnerabilities are identified, the mediums and the low ones, there should be the need to also manage those kind of risk, of course, based on risk. Then 11.3.1.2 also says that internal vulnerability scans are to be performed via authenticated scanning. So if you are doing VA, vulnerability scan, vulnerability assessment on your network, you need to ensure that it is set up to do authenticated scanning. Then 11.4.2 says that, in fact, this is solely applicable to service providers. It says that multi-tenant service providers should support their customers for external penetration testing. So let's say service providers who provide hosting services to different customers. When these customers want to perform penetration testing external, it is incumbent on these service providers to support in conducting such external penetration testing. Then section 11.5.1 also says intrusion detection system or intrusion prevention system should be able to detect, alert on, or prevent and address covert malware communication channels. So the IDS IPS solution we're using should be able to perform all these functions, especially playing the role, helping us, get rid of possible malware attacks on our environment. And 11.6.1 says that there should be a change and temper detection mechanism deployed on our payment pages. So especially pages that we initiate payments from, there's a need to have change and temper detection mechanisms deployed on such environment. And by so saying, we are talking of tools here. We want to principal requirement 12. So in principal requirement 12, these are the new requirements. Under 12.3.1, it says that it should be a targeted risk analysis that should be documented to support each PCIDSS requirement that provides flexibility for how frequently it is performed. So what we're talking about here is that some of the PCI requirements, they don't state specific timeline or frequencies for review. So there is a need, when there's that flexibility, there's a need to perform risk analysis to determine how frequently those requirements are supposed to be reviewed or performed. Then 12.3.2 says there should be a targeted risk analysis for each PCIDSS requirement that is met with a customized approach. So Mary mentioned this in her presentation. Customized approach is a new technique that version 4.0 brings to bear. In fact, it's for requirements that you can meet with customized approach. It spells out what you're supposed to do. So, for example, the standard itself has what you're supposed to do. But with customized approach, if you cannot do what the standard is saying, but you can do you can do something, or you have something in place to meet the intent of the standard as captured on the face of the standard in the customized approach objective, you can use that. In fact, a customized approach is different from compensated control. These are two different things. So we're saying that there should be a risk analysis when you want to meet a requirement with a customized approach. Then section 12.3.3 says that cryptographic cipher suite and protocols in use are to be documented and reviewed. So you need to, in fact, I must mention that version 4.2 is going more into documentation, and it's very important. We always say what is not documented does not exist. So it's going more into documentation. So we should have all these documented. Then section 12.3.4 says that hardware and software technologies in use are to be reviewed at least annually. So at least every year, you need to ensure that you review your assets, hardware, software. And the essence of this is to ensure that systems that may be going out of date or out of support, you plan, you budget, and make sure they are replaced so that you can get the necessary support in that respect. Then 12.5.2 also say that the scope of the PCIDSS need to be documented and also confirmed at least annually. In fact, from 3.2.1, it was very silent on this. Of course, it was kind of a presumed thing to be done because you see the scope more or less sitting on the face of your attestation of compliance or sitting on the face of your report of compliance. But as it stands now, it is incumbent on the entity who want to attain certification to PCIDSS to document the scope and ensure that the scope is reviewed at least every year. Then section 12.5.2.1 said that the scope should be documented and confirmed at least every 6 months. So this is specific at 12.5.2 and specifically to service providers. So for service provider, you're supposed to do that every 6 months or when there are significant changes. But for all other entities, you're supposed to do that every year. Then at 12.5.3, it says that the impact of significant organizational changes to PCIDSS scope should be documented and reviewed and result communicated to executive management. So basically what this is saying is that when there are significant changes within the scope of the PCI DSS, it needs to be documented. The impact needs to be assessed for management approval. Now, significant here means, it's subjective or it's based on, scenario, but we can talk of in situations like measures or acquisition of organization or integration of different systems or decommissioning or even commissioning of devices onto within the CDE, within the card order data environment. Now we'll move on to the next batch of new requirement in version, the principal requirement 12. So 12.6.2 says that the security awareness program should be reviewed at least annually and updated as needed. So we should have a security awareness program. So for month 1, this is what I'm going to, these are the kind of awareness I'm going to do. And these are my target audience. Month 2, this is what I'm going to do. So this plan needs to be reviewed and updated annually so that if there are new changes, especially within the security landscape, in terms of historical data you're having, that will help you, or incidents that you have to help you shape your awareness plan or program. Then section 12.6.3 says that the security awareness training should include phishing and related attacks and social engineering. So I would say this is a minimum baseline. So if you want to have a awareness program, you should make sure it includes phishing and related attacks as well as social engineering. And section 12.6.3.2 says that the security awareness training should also include awareness about acceptable use of end user technologies. Yes, employees might have signed acceptable use policy, they might have read and signed. But the point is, in our awareness space, we need to also drum home the point to them. Then section 12.9.2 say that third-party service providers should support customers' requests to obtain PCI DSS compliance status and information about PCI DSS requirements that are met. That are the responsibilities of these third-party service providers. So let me explain this way. This requirement is specifically to service provider. So within the PCI DSS space, if an entity outsources its service to a service provider or a vendor, that's applicable requirement, let's say storage. So let's say entity A outsources its data storage, which is card data storage, to third party B. Third party B will be responsible for the requirement or controls requiring pertaining to storage of card holder data. So that responsibility sits with the service provider. And when it comes to the PCI audit, or even for the purpose of assurance, there's a need for the entity to satisfy itself that, okay, these requirements are responsibility of service provider A. So service provider A, can you give me evidence to show that indeed you are meeting this requirement? And in terms of evidence, the primary evidence for this is the attestation of compliance, or the AOC that we call it. So this is making it very incumbent on service providers to ensure that they collaborate. In fact, in practice, there have been instances that service providers, entities will need some form of information from service providers, and it becomes a very tough thing to do. But I think with this requirement, it's very straightforward. Service providers will also collaborate with other entities in that respect. Then section 12.10.4.1 says that there should be a targeted risk analysis performed to determine the frequency of periodic training of incident response plan. So 12.10 requires that the incident response team are trained, but as to the frequency, there's the need to have a risk analysis to determine how periodic this team needs to be trained. Of course, a number of factors come to play to make that determination. Then section 12.10.5 also says that the security incident response plan should include alerts from the change and tamper detection mechanism for payment pages. So as I indicated earlier, there's a new requirement to have for web application or payment application, we should have the change and tamper detection. So we're saying that in our incident response plan, there should be a response scenario, a response plan to attend to incidents related to, search mechanism. Then section 12.10.7 says that the incident response procedures should be put in place and initiated upon detection of primary account number. So with this requirement, yes, primary account number may be sitting within your environment at designated places, but if PAN is found at a place it is not supposed to be. So let's say a PAN primary account number is on a document, and the document is meant to be in a particular drawer, and the document is found at the entrance of the office. So there should be, your incident response plan should spell out how such such a scenario would have to be responded to or acted on. So move on to the appendix. So in the appendix, in fact, the only changes in the appendix are in Appendix A. And A1.1.1 says that multi-tenant service providers should confirm access to and from customer environment is logically separated to prevent unauthorized access. So basically what this means that for service providers who are giving platforms for organization to use, you need to ensure that those systems are logically separated so that tenant A cannot access the area, the resources or the space of tenant B. Basically, that's what's saying. Then A1.1.4 is also saying that that kind of logical separation should also be validated every 6 months through penetration testing. So this is also specifically for service providers, as we saw for the previous one. Then A1.2.3 also is telling them that those service providers should implement process or mechanism for reporting and addressing suspected or confirmed security incidents or vulnerability. So you should have laid down procedures, especially point of contact and escalation point, and even the entire procedure. They need to make that available for put that in place and make that available for the tenant to report suspected or actual incident of vulnerabilities. Then A3.3.1 says that failures of automated log review mechanisms and automated code review tools should be detected, alerted, and reported in a timely manner. So as earlier indicated, in fact, it's similar to what we saw in the previous session, but this has its own kind of application. For those log review mechanisms that we've touched on and other set tools, their failure need to be promptly detected and acted on. So we go into the next session where we're looking at how we can transition from version 3.2.1 to version 4.0. And I'll say this section is primarily for those who already certified or implement PCI version 3.2.1. So how do we move from the last version to the previous version to the current version? Considering the timelines that Mary walked us through. So let's see what we can do. So in order to easily transition to version 4.0, there are two groups of things we need to do. So one thing is we need to do some activities from now, as we speak on this webinar, till March 2024. And I mean that these activities are meant to make sure that by the time version 3.2.1 retires, will be compliant. Basically, that's what it means. So the first thing to do is to identify the PCI DSS roles and responsibilities. Now, how do you identify these PCI DSS roles and responsibilities, which we've seen repeatedly in all the principal requirements as a new requirement? What you have to do is simple. You go into the standard, and in fact, the standard is a free resource that you can get access to. So you go into the standard, you check each of those requirements and check those actionable items in there. So you just have to pick those actionable items in there, just get them, then you document them. In fact, documenting them is more of copy and paste and just do the necessary modification. So you document those roles and responsibilities, then you assign. So this responsibility is supposed to be, okay, this should go to the awareness, which should go to HR, this should go to information security, this should go to IT, this should go to top management, this should go to physical security, just mention them. So you assign them. Then you communicate to those who are responsible, those you've assigned. You might probably assign on paper, but they wouldn't be aware of what they're supposed to do. So you need to communicate to them to know that, okay, HR, this is supposed to be your responsibility going forward, or additional responsibility going forward. IT, this is supposed to be your responsibility going forward, etc. Then you ensure the roles and responsibilities are understood by those stakeholders or those process owners. Now, how do you ensure that? You can do that through awareness. You can do that through training. The point is, if you create awareness, if they are aware of their roles and they are not competent enough to undertake that role, then it's as good as nothing has been done. So we can do awareness and training to make sure that they understand what they're supposed to do. Then you need to also document the PCI DSS scope and confirm it annually. Then you need to create awareness of the changes. So you are creating awareness of the changes in version 4.0 to all the stakeholders, both internal and external. Now, move on to the things we need to do. The next set of things we need to do has to do with meeting the future dated requirement. That is meeting the deadline of March 31, 2025. So basically that. So in meeting the future data requirement, the first thing we need to do, we need to start budgeting. So we need to, based on the new requirements we went through, we see tools from WAF to SIM or log aggregators to change detections mechanism. There are a lot of tools to procure in that space. And once the standard mentions that, please, no QSA will certify you without having that tool sitting there. So there will be money involved. There will be some resources involved. So you need to start budgeting. And the point is, if you had created awareness in the first phase, as I mentioned, if you had created awareness, management would have already been aware of what is coming. And getting your budget approved wouldn't be a big deal. Then you also have to focus, the next thing is to focus on the cinches. By this, we mean that there are some of the new requirements you saw, they are not capital intensive. They don't need so much of logistics to implement them. So get them done as you're waiting for your budget to go through. Then after that, you can implement the remaining controls. So these remaining controls are the capital intensive or time demanding requirement that you may have to implement. Then there's a need to have an independent person to review the changes or the requirements that you've implemented. Independent person may not necessarily be someone outside the organization, but an internal person who's independent of the PCI DSS space. And your internal audit should be, if you have a competent person in there, should be the ideal person to do that. Equally, if you want to outsource that role to, you can equally call in an individual who is competent in that space. Who is competent in that space to do that review. And when that review is done, there's a need to remediate any findings that may come out of that review. The point here is that if there are issues and you don't remediate, and especially if you want to certify and go and call a QSA, you will still do that job. So it's better you do it before you go and call QSA. Otherwise, you'll be throwing money away. So, team, this brings us to the end of the presentation. The floor is open for questions. And as Nina indicated in the opening, you can raise up your hand and be unmuted to speak. But before I receive other questions from the house, we received a question, a pre-event question from Timothy Azuma. Timothy Azuma sent us 2 questions. I would like to read that out and also answer Timothy. So the first question from Timothy was the question, in fact, it's not intelligible, but I want to read so that if it's on the call, it may throw more light on the question. The first question from Timothy read, does the primary objective for PCI DSS, just a moment. Just a moment. Okay, so let me repeat. Does the primary objective for PCI requirement changes with the retirement of 3.2.1 to 4.0? I don't get that question clear. So Timothy, if you're on the call, you can help us. But question 2, you mentioned that does requirement 2 of PCI version 4.0 applies to only traditional systems, example router, server, etc., or include systems accessed through a cloud service. So Timothy, this is, in fact, when it comes to requirement 2, it applies to whether it's hardware, it's a software, it is virtual or physical. So it applies to any IT system. So basically, Timothy, that is it. So please, the floor is open. So you can put your questions in the chat box. Okay. So just a moment. Okay, so there's a question, just a moment. Okay, so Richard Poku mentioned he has a question. He says also regarding 4.2.1, are they talking of RSA key pairs when they mention the set? In fact, the set, I mean, it's cut across. Of course, it depends on what kind of key or mechanism that you are using. And Richard Opoku also asked the question that okay, let me see. Okay, so Richard Poku is saying that 6.4.3 is not very clear for a merchant. That is not a processor. In the case of a merchant handing over liability to a processor by using a hosted checkout, how does the merchant validate all the resources that may be loaded on the customer's browser? Can you explain? So, in fact, when it comes to PCI DSS, we just a moment. Okay, so when it comes to PCI DSS, we have what we call the responsibility metrics, especially processes that you've outsourced that are not within your control. It is your responsibility to ensure that the person you've outsourced that process to comply with that requirement. So that's why we saw the new requirement saying that the service providers are supposed to, collaborate or help entities understand or get insight as to their responsibilities. And there's also another question from Blesson. My French is not good. Okay, I get it. Okay, so Emmanuel Wosi has a question. It says for organizations who have outsourced their card processing to third parties, would the organization also have to certify if the third party is already certified? Yes. In fact, Ima, this question we face it a lot, especially within our space. The point is, you've outsourced. In fact, when it comes to PCI application, as Mary indicated earlier, it's about processing, storing, transmission. So you may not be storing, you may have outsourced the storage part, but you may be processing or transmitting. And in that sense, you are meant to certify. But even with the use of the word certified here, of course, you can talk of certified when maybe you want to certify or there's a regulatory requirement in that space. But the fact is, you can adopt the standard after this without necessarily getting certified. Then Collins John also has a question. Please, is this update applicable to all IT systems? Okay, good. So Collins, as I mentioned earlier, all the conversation we had on this call is primarily for systems that process, store, or transmit card holder data, or systems that interact or provide security systems or to the card holder data environment. So yes, it's a general control. It's a best practice, let me put it this way, that you can adopt generally across IT. But in the scope of PCI DSS, these are meant to be applied to systems in scope of PCI DSS. Then anonymous attendee says, does it apply to mobile apps for banks? Okay, so when we talk of PCI DSS requirement and its applicability to mobile apps, it will apply if that mobile app there are some card components in there. When there's some form of card processing or any form of card interaction in there, then it may apply to that app. But the point is, PCIDSS PCISSC has a standard purposely for application, or we call them payment application. This we call PADSS, but we are looking at it from solely within the PCIDSS space, and it's applicable when there's a card-related issues in there. Then Elvis Barton also asked this question. Elvis says, can you please help us with all the changes in the new version? It makes the work easy for us. Okay, so Elvis, I think I can help you this way. Because of time, what I can do is that you can go to the PCISSC website, go to PCISSC.org. If you go there, just do this search. They have a document library. Search for summary of changes in PCI DSS version 3.2.1. So summary of changes. So you can just get hold of that document. It's a free resource, and you see all these changes in there, then you can, equally figure them out because of time on this call. Okay, yeah, if you have any question, you can raise up your hand. Then we can meet you.
Hello, this is Emmanuel.
Okay, Emmanuel, please, you have the floor.
You could realize that the new version is heavy on documentation. Can you hear me, please?
Yes, Emmanuel.
Yeah. There's so much documentation on this. Imagine you have ISO.
Yes, Emmanuel, I can hear.
Yeah, if you have ISO 27001.
My question?
If you have ISO 27001, which is heavily documented already, is it okay to just put most of these documentations into the ISO and then make it a single document or like part of the ISO documentation, or you need to separate, you need to create a different documentation for PCI as well?
Sorry, please, can you repeat your question?
So if you have ISO 27001, which is already documented, is it just okay to add the PCI component of it to the ISO? Because they're almost speaking the same thing, just that PCI is being specific. Can you just add to the documentation of ISO 27001, or you need to separate the policies and the rest for the ISO or the PCI DSS?
Okay, so Ima, on that, in fact, the standard, both even the 27001 PCI, they are very silent on where those documented information should sit. And in practice, it's ideal to even combine them. It will save you a lot of time. The only thing is, the thing is documented and it's sitting somewhere. The only thing is, when you are being audited or for purpose of validation, you just have to make sure that document is made available. This is what the part of this part of this document is speaking to this, and that should be. So you shouldn't necessarily have separated PCIDSS document or separated ISO 27001 document. In fact, for what we've done for some organization in an integrated fashion, we combine both PCIDSS and ISO 27001 documentation. So that's even the easier way out. I hope I've helped, Iman.
Yeah, thank you. That's very helpful.
Okay, Abigail, you have the floor. Abigail Ashley. Hello, Abigail. Abigail, you're muted, so please, you can mute yourself and speak. You can speak, sorry. Okay, Evans, please, you have the floor. You can ask your question. Evans, please, you are muted now, please. You can put your question.
Sorry, that was a mistake. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
Please proceed.
Okay, I can see Sheku stand up. Sheku,
Hello, good afternoon.
Sheku.
Yeah, thank you so much for the wonderful presentation. It was really nice. For some of us, we really abreast with the version 3.1. Now we are trying to transform to version 4.0, which is very good. Now, according to what you just said now, in relation of the new version that we're trying to migrate to now, all of the requirements from 1 to 12, I think talking about documentation, which is fine. According to the ISO again, because ISO and PCI are interrelated in some clauses as well.
Sure.
I want to know, being that this new versions, all the clauses are just documentations. So like what the guy just said, for the new, like for organizations that are trying to migrate to this new version. So it's like for us, we have to more be we have to think about the documentation, which is very key. So I want to know if we are trying to migrate to this version 4.0, you forget the documentation. Is that I don't know if the audit purpose will flag or not. Like if you have a QSA want to audit your organization now, like we forget about the some requirement, forget about documentations. So QSA will flag you. I want to know about that.
Okay, thank you. So, in fact, if you look at 3.3.2.1 vis-a-vis 4.0, in fact, the requirements remain the same, except the new requirement. But I mean, I'm looking at it from the technical non-documentation bit of the standard. The documentation is just additional, and it wasn't more of like a replacement of the previous requirements in the requirement in the version 3.2.1. And as the standard has spelled out, it should be documented. In fact, it's very emphatic on that. You can't get certified if you don't have all those requirements captured. And you know, these requirements are basically on the documentation, on the roles and responsibilities. So getting your roles and responsibilities documented and shared, I don't think it's too much of a big deal. And a QSA would definitely flag it. Especially when it comes handy. It's not too much of work. So basically, this is what I can say. Okay, Elvis Boateng. Elvis.
Yeah, hello.
Yes,
yeah, hello.
Yes,
good morning, and then thanks for this wonderful call. For academic purpose, I saw that with the new changes, if you are using password or paraphrasing, you are required to change your password within 90 days. So I want to know if you are using a multi-factor authentication, okay, are you supposed to, I want to know the maximum period you are required to make those changes. That's one. And the second question is that verifying the certificates, should it be done on a daily basis, or I mean, I want to know the period that should be verifying your certificate. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. So let me start from the last one, certificate verification. So if you remember, one of the new requirements said that these certificates should be inventory. So once you've inventoried them, in terms of the attributes you will capture for the inventory, you would have to include even the expiry and the like. So that should be let me say your benchmarking. Of course, the standard also specify in terms of verifying them. It spells out so many mechanisms, about 2 or 3 mechanisms in the guidance session on how you can do set verification. So it is silent on the frequency, but if you ask me of the frequency, just am I sorry? If you ask me of the frequency, I'll say it should be based on risk and based on what you captured in your inventory. Then in terms of your first question, if you said that if you have MFA in place, what should be the frequency of password change? As I indicated earlier, the new requirement is saying that if you are using a single factor authentication, username and password, with that one, you need to make sure that it is, regularly changed, basically that. But of course, it doesn't take away the fact, it will still apply. It doesn't take away the fact that if you are using even MFA, you should, so keep your password in perpetuity. Of course, there's been this, should I call it debate, on that. But the point is, you shouldn't keep the password in perpetuity. You should change in addition to MFA. Well, we talk of layered security, or security in depth. So basically, this is how it's supposed to be. So I think this brings us to the this section. There are some previous, subsequent. So at this point in time, I will call in my colleague. Just a moment. I'll call in my colleague Nina to take over from me. Just a moment. Okay, so Nina can take over. So as we wait for Nina to come in, basically we want to walk you through our services. Nina will take over from here.
Okay. Thank you very much, Sherif, for this valuable information. As Sherif mentioned, we just want to take you through some of our cyber services. So we do offer our services through 4 categories. The first one, which is a cyber strategy, it just helps our clients to establish risk-focused control around their most sensitive assets, balancing the need to reduce risk, while also enabling productivity, business growth, and cost optimization objectives. The second service, which is vigilance service, it provides our clients with advanced cyber threat intelligence, threat monitoring, and threat hunting, and security analytics capability to help protect their most critical assets. We do also offer advanced managed security services and incident management delivered through a global network of connected 24 cyber intelligence centers that provide clients across the globe with a high touch and selected services. We also have a resilience services, which just allow organizations to operate rapidly, adapt, and respond to internal and external dynamic changes, opportunity or demand disruption or threat, and continue operation with limited impact to your business in case something happens. So at this point, I would just like to thank you for all your participation, a special appreciation to each of our partners, ISACA Accra Chapter, Institute of ICT Professionals, Women in Cybersecurity, and IC Square. This was really an insightful session. Your engagement and participation have truly enriched this discussion around the changes in PCI DSS version 4.0. As we wrap up this webinar, let us carry forth the insights gained here to foster our security posture, and do not hesitate to contact us if you need any assistance. Remember, these shifts have explored today are not just about compliance. They will just help us also to enhance our security posture and securing sensitive data, and ultimately for saving trust in the payment card industry. So I encourage you to continue the conversation, share your newfound perspective, and collaborate to pave the way for a safer digital landscape. Thank you for being part of this transformative dialogue, and we look forward to supporting you in your PCI DSS compliance journey. Together, we are charting a path towards a more secure and resilient digital future. Thank you, and do enjoy the rest of your day. So before we are going to share with you our feedback form, please feel free to give the feedback, as this will help us to enhance our future events. Thank you.